Hello, everyone. Greetings. It's been, let's say, probably over a year since my last episode of Canadian Meets the South. And unfortunately, I don't even remember what episode this is. But today I'll be reviewing Jefferson Davis, The Man in His Hour, which is a 1991 biography of Jefferson Davis by William C. Davis, who's actually not related to him. And I actually finished the book last month, but I was on a trip, and I don't want to really talk about my trip. I mean, I'm sure now that I've mentioned it, you're interested. But I was I finished it on the plane, and I got back several days ago. So I was thinking, okay, now it's time to record an episode. And yeah, I mean, my first few episodes of this podcast, I had done a little bit of editing. I put some pictures in, but yeah, for vast majority of the episodes, like let's say after like fourth episode onwards, or fifth episode onwards, I haven't really been doing much editing. Well, let's talk about the book, and then let's talk a lot of things in Canadian politics have happened. So we'll talk about that as well. But Jefferson Davis, the man in his hour, is let's just say wasn't there's a lot that I learned in this book. I learned, for example, that Davis, and not just Davis, but his fellow students, first at the Catholic school that he went to, and then later at West Point, had learned French. So they were proficient at reading and writing French, but when they would read aloud, they would always, read aloud in English pronunciation, which is, understandable because uh, there's no need to speak in French while you're in most of the United States, like apart from, I guess, Louisiana, or if you're in one of the states that border Quebec or New Brunswick, then yeah, you, as an American, you wouldn't really need to speak French, but being proficient at written French was important. And then they would write a lot of history. Sorry, I'm gonna check my. I think he had that Jefferson Davis had, risen up or read history of Charles X, who's of France, and he lived from 1757 to 1836. Or it might have been someone else, but he was able to read his French history books, and it was important to do that because a lot of military campaigns and battles took place in France, and that's why it was important. I could talk about how also, so I guess, sorry, my mind's kind of going all over the place. I have a friend who was born in Montreal, but he moved to Ontario when he was really young. But his mother was like legit. Oh, was a born and raised Quebecois, and for as long as his mother was alive, he spoke French. But then when his mother died, he stopped speaking French that much. And for him, it takes a lot of mental. It always took a lot of mental energy to read and write in French compared to English because, like I said, he spent most of his life in Ontario. But yeah, that's kind of the opposite of Jefferson Davis and a lot of his fellow students at West Point, uh, who were very proficient at reading and writing in French, but they spoke French like it was English. So I found that pretty interesting. And also found interesting, like I guess he was the only non-Catholic in his Catholic school, and he was also the youngest uh sibling in his family, Jefferson Davis, and there's like a I think a 23 or 24-year old different year difference between him and his brother Joseph, and his father who had fought in the American War for Independence was basically old enough to be his grandfather. Um, you can look up how old they were or their birth dates. I don't remember. It's been a while. But the biography obviously talks about his formative years, as well as the war. Well, and his political career leading up to the war, like his participation in the Black Hawk War, I think like in the 1830s. Then his stint in Congress. Sorry, I don't even remember the years. He had more than one stint in Congress. He was first in the House of Representatives, later in the Senate, but then his friend Franklin Pierce from New Hampshire told him, selected him to be part of the cabinet as the Secretary of War. And what's interesting is that he really helped form the military, like as the Secretary of War, the military that he'd eventually have to fight in the war between the states as a Southerner, and that's something that not everyone realizes. But he was chosen as Secretary of War because, well, his military experience certainly, and his and then after Franklin Pierce's term ends, he heads back to the Senate, and until and he's there until Mississippi declares its independence from the Union. And also in this biography talks about his relationship with Zachary Taylor and how Taylor originally did not want his daughter to have a military husband, but um, the, Davis still pursued his daughter, and then they eventually did get married. And 3 months in, She dies, but Davis survives, and certain from this is from, I don't remember if it's tuberculosis, or there was a disease going around that somehow Davis survived, but his wife didn't. And then he blamed. Let's just look up his wife, Zachary Taylor daughter. Sarah Knox Taylor, right? The was first wife of Jefferson Davis and daughter of Zachary Taylor. But yeah, she dies of was malaria, actually, not tuberculosis. My bad. But Jefferson Davis and Zachary Taylor's relationship went foul for a little bit, but then after during the Mexican American War, Taylor and Davis are fighting on the same side, of course, and Taylor is impressed with Davis, and then he had said, "My daughter was had a better judgment of character than I ever will be." Like, sorry, I'm gonna look up that is, sorry, this is not good that I'm looking this up. Um, my daughter, sir, was a better judge of men than I was. Especially, it was after the Battle of Buena Vista, when Davis was a colonel under General Zachary Taylor. He was impressed by Davis's performance. And then the biography also talks about how Davis had during the 1848 election, he had to walk a thin line because he had loved Taylor, but he could not actually speak against him during the campaign. I think Davis had campaigned for other Democrats, but Taylor was running as a Whig. Honestly, Taylor could have went for either party because both parties wanted him because of his success in the military. But Dave, and I remember saying on this podcast like 3 years ago, after reviewing Jefferson Davis's book, The Rise and Fall of the Confederate Government, that he had said he had loved Zachary Taylor, but Taylor was a Whig and his advisors would have been Whigs, and so that's why he could not actually vote for him. And it must have been really tough in 48. Well, what to do, because if he had, like expressed delight, if he had like wholeheartedly supported Taylor to become president, that would be going against his party, and Davis was a states' rights Democrat, and then Calhoun was still alive, but when Calhoun would die, he would essentially become the leader of the Southern Democrats. But yeah, after the election, then you'd have the Compromise of 1850. Really talking about, like, the biography goes into his relationships with different people on the different sides of the compromise. And as if, and Taylor was supposedly against the compromise back when the compromise was an omnibus bill by, I think it was Stephens, who would be the former Confederate vice president. No, the future Confederate vice president. He was a Southern Whig, and he was pushing for the bill that not for the compromise as an omnibus package, while Davis was against the compromise, just like Calhoun. And Calhoun dies during this era of the compromise, like before it gets passed. Calhoun dies before Taylor, and he did have like a friendship with both Davis and his second wife, and Calhoun referred to his second wife as my child. So there was, I guess, a little some intimacy, even though certainly they didn't agree on everything. Davis wanted a Secretary of the Interior, and then Calhoun thought that was unconstitutional. I'm not sure if that was mentioned in this biography. It was mentioned in Robert Elder's Calhoun biography. And then also, they disagreed on, I guess, nullification. I mean, Calhoun was always the guy. No, Calhoun actually referred to it as state interposition. But, I mean, from a lot of people's point of view, like state interposition or nullification, they're basically the same thing. I understand that 1798 Virginia resolutions, the term interposition is used, and Madison is not the one who uses the word nullification, and that's Jefferson in the 1799 Kentucky Resolution. And Jefferson wanted it to be in 98 Kentucky Resolution as well, but it was removed. And that's a whole different story before Davis was even born. But yeah. Another thing I mentioned, I guess, his relationship with Clay. Clay lived a little bit longer than Davis. And I think they had both fought on, Clay's son had fought alongside Davis in the Mexican-American War and had died. And of course, because they had taken opposite sides during the compromise, Davis thought that Clay disgraced the memory of his son and what his son fought and died for by supporting the compromise. Like, Clay was, he was the Kentuckian who, the Southerner, I guess, who really had more in common with, like, economically speaking, more in common with the North, particularly the Mid-Atlantic, because certainly New England has always wanted to dominate the Union, but Mid-Atlantic wanted the high tariffs before New England. Then it's in the war, after the War of 1812, so let's say 1816, 1817, it was the Mid-Atlantic states, so Pennsylvania and New York, who were pushing for the high tariff, along with, of course, some of the South, some of the South, including uh, what Clay represented. But Clay always what Clay wanted was essentially the American school of Alexander Hamilton, um, which was high protective tariffs, a central bank, and internal improvements, aka corporate welfare for um, infrastructure. And those things were banned except for in the Confederate Constitution, with the exception of internal improvements on the coast. So Clay needed to keep the Union together, and for to keep his system, and that's why he was really strong on the compromise. Of course, on the other side, you have Calhoun, whom, for the most part, for the most part, uh, Davis was following, and I guess by a lot of historians refer to him as anti-union because of his position not just on nullification but in general on states' rights and with being firm in states' rights and on being against the Compromise of 1850. And so Calhoun, well, so that he gets he gets labeled as an anti-unionist by I guess some historians, but nullification he believed was a pro-union position, trying to keep the union together to prevent so that secession wouldn't be deemed as necessary by the southern states or by South Carolina at the very least. And as for the Compromise of 1850, he said the on his dying his speech right before he died, which was actually read aloud by Senator Mason from Virginia. Uh, Calhoun had said that the South, the North has to do has to like the South can't do anything about this. The North has to recognize that they need to stop. They need to come around to the South side when it comes to um the issue of slavery. And then of course I've rambled a lot on this podcast and haven't talked about slavery, have right? And multiple times it's goes on to the biography talks about a lot of Davis and how his the system for slaves was like I guess progressive, kind of like, which he I guess he learned from his uh his brother Joseph, and how he had treated slaves with dignity, and then how like on the plantation there was I think a judicial system of the slave and the slaves were judging each other, and yeah, there was a sense of justice. Not to mention that yeah, he treated the slaves with dignity a lot more than compared to like other slave owners, especially in the deep South. And also mentioned a lot about his, I guess, racial prejudice and how he believed that God was against like the mixture of races, and not just in marriage, but also like that the idea that the black man should be equal to the white man, he believed was against God, what God wanted. And as much as I'd like to say, if he had chose to convert to Catholicism, he wouldn't have those views, because that has never been the Catholic Church's point of view, um, of being, like, let's say, against interracial marriages, or that one race is superior to another. Certainly, there have been Catholics who believed in that, and you see that, like, a lot in Louisiana. You'd have even a one drop rule in Louisiana, like the one drop rule being, if you have one drop of black blood, then you're black. So if you have the one drop rule is, the natural outcome of, a belief in racial purity. But and then certainly it is not, I wouldn't say it's compatible with the Catholic faith. But he chose not to become Catholic. He was, despite going to a Catholic school, and then his teacher was a Catholic priest. He was actually baptized Episcopal, I believe, and then that was after, like, the influence of his second wife, Verena Davis, wanted him to be baptized. And, like, Episcopal is, the Anglicans, or the Church of, they call themselves the Church of England before the Revolution. Like, they reorganized themselves after the American War for Independence. But yeah, now, like, the things he said about race, obviously in 2025, or just in general the 21st century, this is, well, by today's standards, like, a lot of people would throw up with what he had to say, but this was, what a lot of people believed in, and he wouldn't have been elected to office if those same people who voted for him didn't believe in those racial things, then, well, let's talk about the war. Like, it's been almost 29 minutes, and I haven't really talked about the war. The war took a big portion of the book. He was, chosen because, not just his experience as an elected official, but also his experience as Secretary of War and his military experience. That's why he was elected unanimously in both the, like, provisional and the permanent Confederate States government. Now, the book went into, like a little bit of, like, that process, and how there were some Georgians who were also, it was, oh man, who was the first Secretary of State? I'm sorry, I'm blanking. Secretary State. No, let's see. It was the Secretary of War. Oh boy, sorry. I'm taking time here. Give me a minute. Toombs. Sorry, I forgot to mention Toombs. Toombs is like, I guess, one of his rivals, and he also had eyed the presidency. But there's a lot of like a little complex politicking. I'm not going to do justice by explaining it here, but Toombs was originally the Secretary of State. Afterwards, like he was in the running. He was thinking of running for president, but the Georgia delegation ultimately went to Davis, as well as the rest of the state delegations. So Toombs was the thorn in his side. You have the three Georgians who were really the thorns in his side. Stevens, the other, who was the vice president, and then Georgia governor was Robert Brown? No, Joseph E. Brown. And all three guys were like, I guess he's kind of resisting him. I think it was Marshall DeRosa who said that the two, who is the scholar on the Confederate Constitution, I think he believed that, well, he's still alive, but he said he believed that North Carolina and Georgia were the two most responsible for, two states most responsible for the Confederacy losing. So the resistance, right? Joseph Brown was really not always cooperative with Jefferson Davis, and especially after the Davis had signed into law the Conscription Act, which I think was first passed by Congress. But a lot of people were getting exceptions, I think, under Joseph Brown, from exceptions like so that they wouldn't get drafted into the Confederate military. On the other hand, you'd also have Toombs. He was first the Secretary of State, but then his disagreements with Davis led him to resign, and so that he would become he would join the army. Sorry, so was he Secretary of War or let me see. Toombs was he was the first Secretary of State, right? So he resigned. No, he left office July 25, 1861, so pretty early in the war. And then obviously North Carolina, I think I may have mentioned this in the podcast previously, but some of them were having buyer's remorse from leaving the Union and joining the Confederacy, and some of them wanted to return. And she said, you have a lot of North Carolinians fighting on the side of the Union. And also, I've mentioned this already, but in a previous podcast, but it went into detail about the first 5 generals appointed by Davis. There would be Samuel Cooper, I think he was originally from New York. He was at the top. He would be Adjutant General and Inspector General, and it was mostly a desk job because he wasn't really fighting. Then you would have Albert Sidney Johnston, who who Davis really loved, and I think after dying in a battle against Grant in 1862, um, Davis had appointed Johnston's son like to be one of his aides, and always made sure that he to tell him that to let his son know that he loved Johnston. Then you'd have Robert E. Lee, who would later he would become general in chief. Then fourth would have Joseph E. Johnston, and the book goes really into detail about Joseph E. Johnston's relationship with Davis, which wasn't really good. And finally, you have General P.T. Beauregard, who was from Louisiana and who supposedly fired the first shot at Sumter. It was not that he physically did it, but it was like under his command. And he was a Catholic, ethnic Creole from Louisiana, who was a French speaker. Actually, but the biography time and time again kept bringing up how Joseph E. Johnston was not performing very well. And when he got injured early in the war, it allowed him to. It gave Davis the opportunity to let Lee take Johnston's position. And for what would become the Army of Northern Virginia, and this like supposedly was one of his greatest decisions, to let Lee join the battlefield, because up until that point, Lee had just been a military advisor. Lee had first resigned his commission in the Union Army to join the Virginia militia. He had resigned on the day of Virginia's choosing to leave the Union, but like it was the same day, but I think it was before the hour that Virginia actually seceded. But yeah, he initially joined the militia, and then later he got transferred to the Confederate military. And so this turned out to be one of Jefferson Davis's best choices. Next, but later Johnston, after recovering from his injuries, would join the battle, but not in the Army of Northern Virginia. He would always be somewhere else, and Johnston was not performing well afterwards, and the reason he had, and supposedly the reason that he never Davis never just told him to never fully relieved him, or never. Sorry, I'm losing my words here, but it was because Beauregard was next in the hierarchy. So he was the 5th general appointed, and that's what the author William C. Davis claims, that despite all of Johnston's failures, he kept Davis always kept him in the army and in the position of power, because right under him was Beauregard, and he didn't want Beauregard to assume all the power that Johnston had. And Johnston and Beauregard, they were not happy with, I guess, how low they were placed, because when they were when the initial appointments by Davis had occurred, because part of this was they had fought, and the top three guys, Cooper, Albert Sidney Johnston, and Lee had not fought, had not already had participated in the war by the time the first um by the time Davis had appointed them. But and another reason was that when Congress passed a law saying that he can appoint these five generals, it was technically supposed to be all at the same time, but because Davis chose to appoint them on different days, they were not all equal. And this really got Johnston and Beauregard unhappy. And there, it's a. I'm making this simple, but yeah, this is So sorry, I'm taking up a lot of time. But yeah, this is. Yeah, it also goes into a lot of his other relationships with other generals, but sorry, my brain's blanking out here. I'm sure you want to get on to like the Canadian politics commentary. So one last thing, he um he after the war, of course, Davis is imprisoned at Fort Monroe for a couple of years, and William C. Davis, the biographer, like goes into the details of how he wasn't a free man. Davis was not a free man, and then um he never actually faced the trial for treason that he was supposed to, because I think it was along the lines he was after being in prison for 2 years, they and then you also have sorry I don't know if I'm being correct here, but you'd have the double jeopardy thing of like could not be punished for the same crime twice. And so if he was already being imprisoned and then he there was this conflict between the civil and military authorities on who should get to keep Davis, and then he had spent I guess he had been punished already by being in this imprisonment, and so if he was to go have like a trial, then it would be, and then it would convict him of another punishment, then give him another punishment, then that would be like the double jeopardy thing that is illegal under the Constitution. Sorry, I might be wrong, but yeah, it talked about how he suffered under Jefferson under when he was imprisoned, and sometimes like the doctor would have to come to see him, and then in the it would briefly talk about his life after the war and how he was unrepentant about his views. So he always, I mean, I liked how William C. Davis had said that yeah, independence was at the end of the day more important to Davis than slavery at the end of the day, and he wanted independence. But finally, I'd like to mention Oh yeah, and he spent time in Montreal, of course, but Davis spent some time in Montreal after I think he was released, and how his daughter had like fell in love with a New Yorker, but I think the marriage fell through after Davis had died. I'm not 100% clear on the details. It's sorry. But yeah. Let's talk about federalism in the context of today in Canadian politics. So a lot has happened since my last podcast. Donald Trump was elected, and then he believed he had the power to sign tariffs unilaterally without Congress. And why would he think he has the power to do that? Because the Congress says that the bills for the collection of revenue have been are only can only be started in the House of Representatives. So yeah, that it definitely can't start with the president. But I think what at least the these Trump's apologists are bringing up how like I think in the 70s he the Congress gave the president power to like emergency powers, I guess. And he's using these emergency powers for defense. Like these tariffs are in defense of China from like I guess the fentanyl that comes through the border. I don't know. It's not constitutionally sound. Essentially, um like the Congress doesn't have the power to give to do this to give these emergency powers, including the power to put tariffs. I mean, I'm not 100% sure on that, but on like which which law they passed in the 70s or but he definitely doesn't have the power to just unilaterally put on tariffs because I mean tariffs are a collection or are a tax, a collection of revenue for the government, and but this led to Justin Trudeau, the former prime minister of Canada, resigning and triggering uh, uh, a liberal leadership race with Mark Carney on winning. No, Mark Carney was the former governor of the Bank of Canada from 2005 to no, I think 2008 to 2013, and then the Bank of England from 2013 to 2018. And let's just say he's got a PhD in economics. I think he earned it in 1995, and now he became prime minister after soon after becoming liberal leader, and then he called an election. The election was April 28th, and then he won the election, but which was almost a majority. So the liberals are still in a minority. They won, I guess, three minorities in a row, but his my no, his mind Mark Carney's minority is really close to being a majority. The left wing, no, NDP are higher. Like I think they were reduced to 6 seats, so they don't even have party status anymore. You need 12 seats in the parliament to have party status, and the bloc also lost seats, but the conservatives gained seats, I think. Like both the liberals and the conservatives gained seats and gained popular vote, but I guess at the expense of the bloc and especially the NDP. You see this, I guess this voting demographic divide between the the boomers, like the people in their 60s who voted for the Liberal Party so that the liberals on their carney could deal with Trump's tariffs, and then you have the conservatives who like I mean the young people who voted conservative because of the price of living, especially like the cost of living and especially housing, and as a result now you have uh, Western separatism on the rise, especially in Alberta. Alberta is kind of like the South Carolina of the United of the Canada. I know, like I guess modern people, no modern uh commentators like Jordan Peterson referred to Alberta as the Texas of Canada. Like if you a couple of years ago he had his interview with Danielle Smith. Jordan Peterson had an interview with Danielle Smith, and then like in the title it mentioned that the Texas of Canada, but and it's true that Texas has like I guess a strong state identity, but it was South Carolina that was pushing, that was involved, that was the first to leave the Union, and I mean I'd be remiss to not mention that South Carolina was the center of the nullification crisis, but I mean during the nullification crisis Texas wasn't even in the Union. So, um, what Danielle Smith, when she campaigned to be the United Conservative leader, the party in control right now in Alberta is the United Conservative Party of Alberta. It was initially led by Jason Kenney, but he he became really unpopular during the pandemic, and then after a leadership review in his party, which he passed by like 51%, but he said that wasn't enough, so he chose to resign, and then there was a leadership race, and Danielle Smith, like there were seven contenders, and Danielle Smith was out of the seven the only one who was not an MLA under Jason Kenney. I mean, there were others who were also like not exact other MLAs in that leadership race who weren't exactly on board with Jason Kennedy. They were like resisting him. Um, but Smith was like the most like it would be the outsider, like the most outside of Jason Kenney's influence, and so I think that's why she won. Although it was a really close race compared to the the federal conservative race in 2022, which Pierre Poilievre won a majority on the first ballot, while I think it took 6 ballots for Smith to win. So it wasn't the landslide that like people were expecting Smith to win in 2023, but it wasn't the landslide that that Poilievre had. And one of the things that she campaigned on in her leadership race was the United the oh bro, I'm gonna mess up the wording, but it's like the Alberta Sovereignty Act within the Alberta Sovereignty within the Act within the United Canada. I think it's something like that. And essentially they would nullify anything that they deemed unconstitutional, which this is what nullification was. And that's why I'm making the connection between Alberta and South Carolina. And right now it seems that among the West, it is South Carolina, it is Alberta that is pushing. No, it is pushing. That a lot of people in Alberta are pushing for uh, separatism. And it's similar to although Smith is always saying she wants to. She keeps repeating that she wants to be in a united Canada. This is kind of like Calhoun advocating for nullification, or what he called state interposition. He always maintained that he was a unionist. He believed that nullification was the remedy for to maintain the union, and that's what Smith is advocating for. For Alberta, and that's why her that act, the United Alberta, sorry, the Sovereign Alberta Act within the United Canada is has the word United Canada within a United Canada, because she's saying this is the remedy for the union. And however, she after the election she changed the criteria for a referendum to be like only 10% of people who voted in the last election, because I think it used to be something like 20% of all eligible voters. So it went from like 667,000 people to 133,000 people. Like that is the threshold required to trigger a referendum. No, previously there was a referendum in Alberta under Jason Kenney. There for equalization, and it was like, I don't remember the exact wording, but I don't think I've ever read the exact wording. My apologies, but it was a referendum like on like whether or not equalization should end, and majority of Albertans who voted in that referendum said voted against equalization. So now we're in this position, or now now it's even easier. A referendum's even easier to pass than under Jason Kenney. You know, if you know what I mean, like, and people are expecting that that Alberta will secede like next year. Like there might be a referendum this, who knows, in October. I don't know, and then oh yeah, and that I think that threshold, like less the of like 10% of people who voted in the last election that they need signatures for that referendum like within 120 days of starting like the collecting signatures, if you know what I mean. But yeah, people are anticipating that um if they go, they go. I mean, they'll leave by next year, and if they leave, then Saskatchewan might leave too, because it's really Alberta who's in the West. The West is kind of the Canadian West is kind of like, well, when I mean West, of like the prairies. The Canadian prairies are like the American South. They're the most. They're the conservative guys. The most free market, and they're the ones, I guess, biggest against the carbon tax. Like back in, well, carbon tax is not the only thing. It's also, I guess, pipelines. But yeah, the like carbon tax. People, I guess, you could make the connection that the carbon tax of today in Canada today was like the tariff in the antebellum United States. Except like well, people argue like, but the tariff was the primary collector of revenue in the United States, and that wasn't how it was in the United States. Not in Canada. Like the carbon tax is not the primary collector of revenue for the federal government in Canada. But the thing is, the West isn't the first to add, to have separatist sentiment. Quebec also wants. Well, a lot of people want in Quebec want to separate, and the Parti Québécois who are up in the polls, but like there isn't going to be an election this year. Might be next year. They are the main separatists in Quebec politics. I think there are like four parties, right? Um, there's the CAQ, which are like Coalition Avenir Québec. Sorry, my French pronunciation is awful. But they're the governing party and they're kind of conservative. But then there's also a conservative party of Quebec, but they don't have any seats. Um, and then there's the Quebec Liberal Party. They were for a long time like the only federalist party. You'd have the Parti Québécois, which are for a long time the only like separatist party at like the provincial level, and then you'd have Québec Solidaire, which are, I guess they're the far left separatists. They won't. They're even more, I guess, social democratic than the Quebec uh, Parti Québécois. Like I'm not the biggest reader into Quebec politics, and like part of that is I I'm not really I'm not highly proficient in reading French, in just French in general. But for a while, it used to be two parties. Like the time when I was born, like let's say in the 90s. Um, during the 1995 referendum, there was there were two major parties, the Quebec Liberals, who were the Federalists, who that they were against separating from Canada, and then that's what I mean by Federalists, and then the Parti Québécois, which are the sovereigntists. They wanted to leave Quebec, and they had there was also this third party, like this a young guy. It's led by a young guy. I forgot his last name. Like, let's look that up right now. 1996. Oh, 1998. Okay, so Mario Dumont from Action Démocratique. So the Action Démocratique, I think they were like the forerunners of Coalition Avenir Québec. So I guess they were kind of conservative, but the the Mario Dumont, and so his party, which was like just him at the time, and and the Parti Québécois were they were in favor of leaving Canada in the 1995 referendum, and then whilst the Quebec Liberals were in favor of staying. So fast forward to today, and then the descendants of the is the political descendant of the political successor of Action Démocratique is the CAC, which are currently in power, and then I think they're federalists, but they're I guess they're more conservative, more free market, I guess, than the Quebec Liberals. So those are the two federalist parties, and then you have uh, Parti Québécois, which are up in the polls right now, and then they're sovereigntists as well as Quebec Solidaire, which are I guess the far left, and then they're also sovereigntists, but the Quebec Solidaire are the most recent party, I guess, among the four. I sorry if I'm not being too accurate, but yeah, there's been a Quebec sovereigntist movement for quite a while, like before I was born, like not just 1995. They were the first. The first election was the first referendum was 1980, and yeah, so you have those. So you have Quebec sovereigntists on one hand, and then Western separatists on the other hand, and then they both are going to. They're both really pushing for. It'll be interesting to see who gets the referendum first. I mean, my bet, like my money, if I had to put money on, my money would be on the Alberta sovereign, the Alberta sovereigntists or the Alberta separatists first. They have their referendum first because yeah, the Parti Québécois are not going to be in power, are not in power yet, and yeah, they're waiting for the provincial election of 2026. But yeah, this is so. I guess this is all the way. I guess in you could say that the South was not the first to advocate for secession as well in the antebellum United States. It was New England. They were the New England Federalists first during the War of 1812. Um, like let's say during the Hartford Convention, they really want a lot of them wanted to secede, but instead they chose okay, we'll just dominate the federal government. So that first you have those New Englanders, um, and actually at the New England Federalists at the Hartford Convention, and at this time John Quincy Adams was not aligned with them because he was a former Federalist who became a Republican after the embargo by Jefferson. But I think, but then decades later, during the Mexican American War, I think he was pushing for secession, and then like I mean they were already thinking of the New Englanders were already thinking of secession because of Texas joining the Union, and then in 1845, and then not long after you'd have the Mexican American War partly over Texas, and yeah, you'd have New Englanders pushing for secession again, this time including John Quincy Adams. Because I mean, at that point, there was no distinction between Federalist and Republican. Like the two-party system in like the 40s was the Whigs and the Democrats, and then this was well at this time, John Quincy Adams was a Whig, but yeah, I guess you could find it interesting that if Alberta were to secede, it would be similar to how Alberta was not the first to agitate for secession, was Quebec. Meanwhile, there. Meanwhile, the South seceded. The Southern states seceded in like 1860 to 1861, but it wasn't. They weren't the first to advocate for secession. It was the New England. Actually, 1794. Even before the War of 1812, um, John Taylor of Caroline is confronted by two New Englanders, Rufus King and Oliver Ellsworth. Like all three of them are senators, and then they said, and that those two New Englanders were saying, okay, let's just break up the Union. And I mean, yeah, because the New England was not in power, although John Adams may have been the vice president. The president was George Washington at that time in 1794, and yeah, George Washington, I guess, was a Southerner, even if he wasn't the strongest on states' rights, and maybe didn't have the strongest Southern identity, because he was more on leaning towards nationalism. But yeah, like the South wasn't the first to agitate for secession, and neither was the Canadian West. Meanwhile, well, and I guess one more thing I should say. 1982, I think you'd have uh, Alberta Alberta's like what was? Let me just look that up. Alberta Separatist MLA 1982. Oh yeah, Gordon Kelsler. So he was a member of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta from February 17, 1982 to November 2, 1982. And yeah, he was an Alberta separatist and for this party called the Western Canadian Concept. Um, and he's actually still alive, Gordon Kessler. So he I mean, there was separatism all the way in 1982, but this is due to Pierre Trudeau. Like this is like in response to Pierre Trudeau and the National Energy Plan during the early 1980s. Like this was Pierre Trudeau's last term as prime minister, and from 1980 to 84, and he wanted and like he was, I'm not doing a good job explaining this, but he was the National Energy Plan really resulted in Westerners like in Alberta, like the energy economy really suffered under this plan, and I could do more reading for next podcast if let's see if I do that, but um yeah, Alberta separatism, although it's only after, like, rose only after Quebec separatism. Like the first um, referendum was 1980, but of course, things don't just start off with a referendum. And like the Parti Québécois was first elected, I think, in 1976. So before 1976, there was like separatist sentiment already rising up, and this was under Pierre Trudeau as well. So yeah, both. But yeah, Quebec separatism technically did start first, and now it might. It looks like that it might be Alberta separatism coming next. Now look, I if I haven't mentioned this before, it would be great if I could, you know, have a move to if I could move to Alberta, or at least like visit Alberta soon, or because I find Alberta is the most free market among the provinces. It's the only one without a PST, provincial sales tax. So like let's say um in 1993, sorry, 1990, the progressive conservative federal government of Brian Mulroney introduced the GST, the goods and services tax, which is currently 5%. And so all all the provinces, in addition, have their own PST or provincial sales tax, and then except for like I said, except for Alberta. So Alberta is only paying that 5% sales tax. Um, and hmm, what else? And yeah, that would mean that the price of things and everything is less expensive, including like I think there is PST on housing or maybe on insurance for housing. It might depend on province. Like each province gets to determine what which things are applicable for its own PST. But um, I I what I like about Alberta is that it's yeah the most free market, and then I mean I'm sure like people who like more people who are more educated than me will tell me there's more than just the PST that makes Alberta more free market region. Kind of like for any in my state, people states viewers like people from the United States who are viewing this. Certain states do not have sales tax, which U.S. states do not have a sales tax. Montana, which is directly south of Alberta, does not have a sales tax. Neither does Delaware, Montana, New Hampshire, or Oregon. No, sorry, I said Montana already. Alaska. So I guess Montana and Alberta do have something in common, and I guess like there are dual citizens on both sides. Maybe they go back and forth. Like they maybe live half the time or 6 months in Alberta, 6 months in Montana. I can imagine there are some people like that, and yeah, they like I guess they're more free market. Like they love not having that sales tax. Although Canada, of course, has the GST now since 1990. But yeah, sorry, I've been speaking a lot. Um, but I want to thank you all for watching. I know I don't upload as much as I used to. Like when I was like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I used to try to upload every month. No, not like every 2 or 3 months. I tried to upload, but like this year and last year, I've only uploaded like once, and I mean I want to upload more, but I'll see. I guess I'm still like interest interested in like reading all this. It's just that like spending my time on doing other things. Like I just started school, and then I also have like other things like that I consume that are not related necessarily to the American South or to Canadian history. And I guess one final thing to comment on is the election of the new pope. He's the first from North America. Specifically, he's from America. Well, he's like people have done research, and then a lot of articles talking about is the Pope black, and then under the one drop rule, yes, he would be black. His maternal grandparents are from Louisiana, um which did have a one drop rule, and I know like people have a lot of opinions on the new pope, and well, he's also Latino in the sense that he is a naturalized citizen of Peru. He spent many years in Peru as a missionary before becoming a before eventually becoming a bishop, and I think he had to he found he naturalized and became a Peruvian citizen before he became bishop, because yeah, I guess nowadays it's kind of weird to for you to be the bishop of a place but you're not the citizen of, like that's kind of how it was in Japan well over 100 years ago, where I think during the Meiji era, they're like and also like the Taisho era, like just in general during the Empire of Japan period. After um they they found the need that they needed uh native clergy, especially native bishops. It's like a lot of people were coming to a lot of missionaries from North America and Europe were coming like as priests to Japan, and they um but then like the church realized, like, okay, it can't just be dominated by foreigners like the church in Japan, so we need more natives to become clergy, including bishops. And then, yeah, that's kind of, I guess that's kind of the same thing with Pope Leo the 14th now. Like before, no, I think he chose to become a naturalized citizen of Peru because, well, like it'd be weird to become the bishop of a Peruvian diocese without being a citizen of Peru. So yeah, that's how he and then he knew Pope Francis. Like Pope Francis was in Argentina, which is another South American country, and yeah, they knew each other. But yeah, people have a lot of opinions on Pope Leo the 14th. Um, and yeah, his ancestry is like quite mixed. Like I'd be remiss to just bring up how he's black under the Louisiana's one drop rule, but I can talk more about him next podcast. But anyways, it's been almost 90 minutes, and I thank you for watching. I don't even remember what episode this is, but nevertheless, it's good to get my thoughts out here, and um, yeah, like we'll see how separatism is like in the coming months and next few years as well, and it'll be an interesting time to like we'll see like parallels on different things. I've also gotten interested a little bit in Swiss federalism. I know that the American founders liked no studied Swiss federalism as like one of the systems that they looked at. Like they looked at a bunch of different systems, right? They also looked at federalism in the Holy Roman Empire, which I mean, the Holy Roman Empire didn't call itself a federation. I don't think it did anyway, but it was essentially a bunch of different states under the emperor. The emperor was at times just a figurehead, but very weak. It was the different states, and then Germany. has like a long history of a long tradition of decentralization, which Hitler kind of destroyed for in his as a because he believed in centralization of power, but like so he was in power for Germany for like 12 years, but like for a lot of German history, there's been federalism, whether it's been the Holy Roman Empire or then there was the German Confederation, like the North German Confederation, the Weimar Republic, and then like you'd have like a brief bit of Nazi Germany, and after the war, I mean Germany was divided into two: West Germany, East Germany. West Germany has always been a federal republic from like the end of the war until now. So I can also talk about like federalism from Germany's point of view, but yeah, Germany and Switzerland are really interesting. I mean, and there are some modern federal countries as well. Like Austria is a federal republic now, but like I think before it used to be a unitary state under the Austria-Hungary Empire. It was, and Belgium, which I think before used to be a unitary, but Belgium has three languages: German, Dutch, and French. And so I think federalism plays an important part in keeping the peace. And the Netherlands used to be a federation, but now it's a unitary state, but it's still somewhat decentralized. Well, like I can talk more about this, about like European federalism and what the founders read. But like I'll say this one last thing. I On my plane ride back home, I was reading this article on how the American founders viewed Swiss federalism, and then yeah, though the quote unquote federalists, the ones who wanted a stronger central government, um, criticized Swiss federalism more. Like we're talking about like guys like John Adams. Um, they believed that it was too weak, while the Republicans um, liked the Swiss model of federalism because it wasn't the federal government wasn't too strong. So I found that interesting. Um I might I might just link I'll link the paper in in the description. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. This has been Canadian Meets the South.